Before starting, if you want to access our exclusive BL stories, you can follow our Patreon page. Link in the channel description. So let's begin.
The envelope was already open when I came down with Pax. I noticed that first. Not the photographs spread across the kitchen island like a hand of cards someone had already decided to play, not the printed pages with their highlighted lines. The envelope itself, slit clean along the top with the silver letter knife that lived in the study, the one that never left the study, the one I had only ever seen Aldric use twice in 2 years. He was standing at the island with both hands flat on the marble, very still. His hands were the stillest part of him, which was wrong, because Aldric's hands were never that still unless he was angry, and when Aldric was angry his hands moved small things, a pen turning, a glass lifted and set down without drinking from it. Tonight they didn't move at all. I filed that away the way I filed everything, a small wrong note in a room full of right ones, and didn't know yet what to do with it. He's asleep, I said, because Pax was, finally, after the drive home from the hospital that had taken 40 minutes and felt like 4 hours. I set the bassinet down near the table, angled so the kitchen light wouldn't fall directly on his face. 2 pounds, 11 ounces, the discharge nurse had written, like that was a number a person could hold in their chest without it doing something to them. Aldric didn't look at the bassinet. That was the second wrong note. I had a pen in my hand. One of the cheap foundation ones, navy plastic, the kind that came in boxes of 200 and ended up in every drawer in the building. Because I'd been filling out the discharge paperwork in the car, the insurance forms, the home monitoring consent, all the small bureaucratic apologies a hospital makes you sign before it lets you take your son home. I set it down on the counter, lined up parallel to the edge, because that was what my hands did when the rest of me didn't know what to do. Cress, Aldric said. I have always liked the way he said my name. I want that on the record, even now, even after everything. He said it like it cost him something small and necessary, like a toll he didn't mind paying. He didn't say it that way tonight. Tonight it came out flat, like he was reading it off something. You should sit down, he said. I didn't sit down. I stood across the island from him on the other side of the photographs, and I looked at them the way I'd look at anything placed in front of me by someone I respected, carefully, completely, before I said a word. Bank transfer summaries. A printed email thread between an address that was supposedly mine and someone at the Hargrove Institute. A photograph of me, actually me, my coat, my hair needing a cut, standing outside a coffee shop on Ridgemont with a man I didn't recognize, both of us caught mid-conversation, my hand half raised like I was making a point. I had never been to Ridgemont. I knew that immediately, the way you know your own hands. I also knew in the same half-second, looking at Aldric's face, that he had already decided this was real. Not might be real. Was. I could see it in the specific stillness of him, the way a person stands when they've already grieved something and are only now performing the part where they say it out loud. So I didn't say I've never been to Ridgemont. I want you to sit with that for a moment because I've sat with it for a long time. I had the truth right there. One sentence, and I didn't say it. I'll come back to why, not yet. This is the audit from the Caldwell grant cycle, Aldric said, and his voice was so reasonable. That was the thing about Aldric. When he was at his most dangerous, he sounded like he was explaining something to a junior associate patient, almost kind. 3 transfers. All routed through an account that traces back to a shell registered 11 months ago. The email thread predates Pax by 4 months. He paused. I had Donnelly verify the metadata himself, twice. Donnelly, I repeated, head of internal security. A careful man, the kind who double-checked things because he'd been burned once early in his career by not double-checking. I had always liked him. The thought arrived and sat there, useless. You don't have anything to say. It wasn't a question. Here is where the hook of this lives, if you want to call it that. Here is the question I'd ask you to carry, because I carried it for 2 years before I had an answer. Why didn't I say anything? I could tell you it was shock. That would be a clean answer and not entirely a lie. But shock doesn't make a person's hands go still and find the edge of a marble counter and press flat against it, the way mine did, mirroring his without meaning to. Shock doesn't make a person think with perfect clarity. If he believes this, he stops looking at the accounts. That thought arrived too. I didn't examine it. I didn't have time, and also, and this is the part I'm least proud of, some small, terrible part of me was relieved it had arrived at all, because it meant the thing I'd been carrying alone for months might finally stay buried where I'd buried it. I didn't know yet how wrong that math was. I want to be clear about that. I didn't know. The Hargrove deal closed 2 weeks ago, Aldric said. 40% above market for a research partnership they'd been chasing for 3 years and couldn't get. Someone gave them our pricing models, our trial data structure, someone with access to grant allocations and donor files. His jaw moved once. That's your office, Cress. That's your office, not that's you. I noticed the distance in it even then, the careful legal shape of the sentence, and some old, tired part of me almost smiled, because even now, even doing this, he was being precise. Aldric was always precise. It was one of the first things I'd loved about him, the way he never said more than he meant, and standing there I understood, with the specific clarity of a man watching a door close from the wrong side, that he meant every word of this. My scent changed. I felt it happen. The suppressants dulled most of it, had for years, but not all of it, never quite all of it, and something in the room shifted because of it. A flattening. The kind of calm that isn't calm, that's a held breath dressed up as one. I saw something cross Aldric's face when it happened. Not recognition, not yet, just a flicker, gone before either of us could name it. He filed it the way I would have filed it. Wrong note, didn't know what to do with it. Neither did I, not then. I think about that flicker more than almost anything else from that night. I'll tell you why later. I think, Aldric said, and here his voice did change, not louder, smaller, like he was setting something down very carefully so it wouldn't break. I think you should go. I looked at him for a long moment, long enough that Pax stirred slightly in the bassinet. A small sound, nothing, and Aldric's hand moved before he seemed to decide it should, reaching down to settle the blanket back over the edge of the bassinet where it had slipped. He didn't look at me while he did it. He didn't look at Pax either, not really. His eyes were somewhere past both of us, at the window, at the dark glass, and his own reflection in it. But his hand knew where the blanket was. His hand had done that 100 times in 2 weeks of NICU visiting hours, and it did it now, automatically, even while the rest of him was finishing the sentence that ended everything. I don't think he knew he did it. I noticed anyway. I noticed things. It's the only skill I came into this family with that nobody could take a forensic team to and disprove. I nodded once. Okay, I said, that was all. I want you to know I thought about saying more. I thought, very briefly, about the folder. The one on the shared drive, 3 subfolders deep, named something boring enough that nobody would open it by accident. I thought about saying before I go, there's something you need to see and it isn't about me. I had the sentence ready. I'd had it ready for weeks, actually, in case something like this ever happened, except I had imagined it happening to me in some smaller way. A memo, a quiet reassignment, not this, not the whole shape of 2 years collapsing in a kitchen with our son asleep 4 feet away. I didn't say it. I want to be honest about that, because everything that came after came from that silence, and I don't get to pretend it didn't. I went around the island instead. I bent over the bassinet and Pax's face did the thing newborns do, that loose, unbothered drift, completely unaware that the room around him had just changed shape. I'd been carrying his pacifier in my coat pocket since the hospital. They'd given us 2, a spare for the car, and I'd forgotten to put it back in the diaper bag. I took it out now and set it on the counter, lined up neat, the way I'd set down the pen earlier, because some part of me was still doing that, still tidying, still being useful right up until the moment I stopped being allowed to be. I leaned down and kissed his forehead through the bassinet netting. It left a faint mesh pattern against my lips, gone in a second. He smelled like the hospital still, faintly, antiseptic under the new skin smell underneath it, and I held that for one breath longer than I needed to. Then I straightened up and I went to the front hall and I didn't take my coat. I want to tell you I forgot it. That would be simpler. The truth is I looked at it on the hook where it always hung, and some part of me, the same part that had just decided not to mention a folder 3 subfolders deep, decided that taking it would mean I expected to need it somewhere else. That I had a somewhere else. I didn't, not yet, not in any way I could have said out loud, so I left it. The front door was heavier than I remembered. February air came in around the edges of it even before I opened it all the way, the kind of cold that doesn't announce itself, just arrives, settles into the back of your neck like it's been waiting. I stepped out onto the porch. Behind me, the house was very quiet. I didn't hear the door close. I remember that specifically. I walked down the steps and across the gravel toward the gate, and the door stayed open behind me the whole time, a rectangle of warm yellow light spilling out across the snow, and I didn't look back to see why. My hand found my coat pocket out of habit, the way it always did, reaching for my phone. It wasn't there. I didn't go back for it. The cold did something to thinking. It simplified it. I made it 4 blocks before I understood that simplification wasn't the same as clarity. My chest had started doing the thing it sometimes did, a flutter, then a drop like missing a stair in the dark, and I stopped walking and put my hand flat against a mailbox until it passed. It passed. It always passed. That was the problem with it. It always passed, which made it easy to file under later and never open again. I had $40 in my coat, except I didn't have my coat. I had whatever was in my trouser pockets, which was a folded grocery receipt, a stick of gum, and $11 in loose bills I'd been meaning to put back in the jar for weeks. There was a diner 2 blocks past the mailbox, the kind that's open all night because someone decided decades ago it should be, and nobody ever revisited the decision. I went in because it was warm and because sitting down seemed, suddenly, like the most urgent thing I had ever wanted. The woman behind the counter looked at me, no coat, February, $11, and didn't ask anything. She just poured coffee into a cup before I'd ordered it and set it down in front of me like that was simply what happened to people who walked in looking like I apparently looked. I drank the coffee. I did not cry, which I want to mention only because I expected to, and didn't, and that absence felt like its own kind of information. Like my body had decided grief was a luxury it couldn't budget for tonight, not with the arrhythmia still ticking unevenly under my ribs, not with $11 and no phone and a son I'd just kissed goodbye through bassinet netting 4 miles away. I thought about the folder, 3 subfolders deep. Grant's Archive 2021/working/misc donor crosscheck. I'd named it that on purpose, boring enough that nobody would open it, including, I'd hoped, me once I'd finished and could pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen. I thought he'll find it eventually. He goes through everything eventually. I thought eventually might not be soon enough. And then I thought about Pax's face, the loose, unbothered drift of sleep, completely unaware, and I put both of those thoughts down very carefully, the way you'd set down something that might break, and I finished the coffee, and I asked the woman behind the counter if there was a shelter nearby that took people without ID. She didn't ask why I needed one. She wrote an address on a napkin in pencil, the kind of pencil that's been sharpened with a knife rather than a sharpener, and she said, "Tell them Marta sent you," even though her name tag said Donna, and I understood that this was its own kind of password, one that had nothing to do with names. If you've ever had to ask a stranger for the name of place to sleep, you know there's a particular kind of quiet that comes after, not relief exactly. More like the moment after you've admitted something out loud and the world simply continues, unbothered, the same as before. Aldric, the phone was on the entryway table. Aldric didn't see it for nearly 2 hours. He spent those 2 hours doing what he did when something had ended and he didn't yet have the shape of what came next. He went into the study and he sat at the desk and he did not turn on the lamp and he listened to the house. Pax woke once, a small thin cry from the bassinet down the hall, and the night nurse, there for the first week, the agency's recommendation, high-risk discharge protocol, handled it before Aldric had finished standing up. He sat back down. He listened to the silence after that. At 11, he went to lock the front door, which was a thing he did every night without thinking about it. The same 3 motions, bolt, chain, the small brass switch for the porch light, and that was when he saw the phone. It was face down on the entryway table, exactly where Cress always put it when he came in the little dish by the bowl of keys, except the keys were still there, and the phone was on top of them instead of beside them, which meant Cress had set it down without looking, the way you set something down when your hands are doing something else, like buttoning a coat. Except he hadn't taken his coat. Aldric stood there for a long moment with his hand still on the bolt, and something in his chest did a small, specific thing that he didn't examine, because examining it would have meant admitting he'd noticed the coat on the hook 3 hours ago and decided not to think about it. He picked up the phone. It was unlocked. Cress never locked it. Had told him once early on, "I don't have anything to hide from you," and Aldric had laughed at the time because it had seemed like such an easy thing to say, the kind of thing people said before they had anything worth hiding. The screen lit. No missed calls, no outgoing calls. The last thing open was a Maps app, zoomed in on a route that started at the estate and ended at the hospital, 3 days old, the route to bring Pax home. Cress had looked at it 3 days ago and never opened the phone again. Aldric set it back down, carefully. In the dish, beside the keys, the way it should have been. He went to the study and pulled up the household accounts instead, because that was a thing he could do, a concrete thing, a thing with numbers. The emergency account, the one in both their names, the one Aldric had set up in the first month they'd lived together and had never once needed, showed a balance untouched in 14 months. No withdrawal tonight. No withdrawal ever actually, not once in 14 months, which Aldric had never noticed because why would he have looked? He sat with that for a while. His phone buzzed at midnight. Donnelly. Aldric almost didn't answer. It was late, and Donnelly knew better than to call this late unless, but he answered. "I need you to look at something," Donnelly said. No preamble. Donnelly never had preamble. It was one of the things Aldric valued about him. The Hargrove email thread, the one from the file tonight. "I've seen it. The header metadata's wrong." A pause, the particular pause of a careful man choosing words he'd already chosen twice. Not wrong like tampered and covered, wrong like nobody covered it at all. The send timestamp is from a server that wasn't provisioned until March of last year. The email is dated November the year before. It's claiming to have been sent from a server that didn't exist yet. Aldric didn't say anything. "I checked it twice," Donnelly said. "I wanted to be sure before I called." "When did you start checking it?" There was a silence on the line that told Aldric more than the words that followed it would. "Tonight, after the dinner. Something about the way it was handed to you through Whitlock in an envelope at trustee's function instead of through the normal channel. It didn't sit right. I should have flagged it before it reached you. I'm sorry, sir." Whitlock. Head of the Foundation's legal office. A man Aldric had known for 11 years, who had stood up at Aldric's wedding. Not married. They weren't married, but the closest thing they'd had, a small dinner with 12 people. And Whitlock had given a toast about the kind of partnership that makes an institution stronger, and Aldric had believed every word of it because there had been no reason not to. "Don't apologize," Aldric said. His voice came out steadier than he felt, which was he was coming to understand exactly the problem with his voice. It had been steady 3 hours ago, too. "Pull everything, the full thread, the bank records, everything in that envelope. I want it all by morning." He hung up before Donnelly could say anything else, and he sat in the dark study with the phone in front of him, Cress's phone. He realized he was still holding it, and for the first time since the dinner, the stillness in his hands broke. He didn't go after Cress that night. I want to be honest about that, on his behalf, because it would be easy to make this part of the story kinder than it was. He sat in the study until almost 3 a.m. with the bank records open on the screen, and the untouched account, and the phone with its 3-day-old map, and somewhere in that combination of facts a cold and growing certainty was assembling itself. But certainty, that night, was not the same as action. He told himself he would deal with it in the morning. He told himself Cress had somewhere to go. He did not, that night, think very hard about where that somewhere might be. Dr. Rue Ashford came to the estate 4 days later. I wasn't there for this. I'm telling it the way Aldric told it to me, much later, in a kitchen that wasn't this one, on a night when telling it cost him something visible, and I'm telling it now the way I came to understand it, which is different from the way it happened, the way understanding always is. She came without calling first, which Dr. Ashford never did. She was a woman who scheduled her own dentist appointments 3 months in advance and arrived early to all of them, and when the housekeeper let her in, she didn't take off her coat. She stood in the front hall with snow still melting on her shoulders and asked, without any preamble at all, where Cress was. Aldric told her. I won't reproduce what she said next, not all of it, because some of it wasn't meant for me to repeat, and some of it, I think, Aldric has never repeated to anyone, including himself, more than the one time it needed saying. But the shape of it was this, that Cress had been her patient for the last 4 months of the pregnancy and the 2 weeks since. That the cardiac strain from a pregnancy that high risk didn't simply resolve at delivery, that there had been an arrhythmia they were monitoring, that it required rest and medication and not, she said. And this was the part Aldric repeated to me, word for word, months later, in a voice that had gone very flat, not walking out into February without a coat. He told me not to tell you, she said. He was very clear about it. I want you to understand that before I say anything else, he asked me directly more than once not to make this your problem. Why? Aldric said, just the one word. Dr. Ashford looked at him for a long moment. He said you already had enough reasons to think he was a liability. He didn't want to give you one more. I think that's the sentence that did it. Not the forged emails, not Donnelly's call, not the untouched account or the phone in the dish. All of that had been building towards something, the way weather builds, but that sentence was the moment it actually broke, because it meant Cress had been managing him. Managing what Aldric thought of him. Managing it for months alone in a hospital while carrying their son. Dr. Ashford reached into her bag and took out a notebook. Small, the kind with a soft cover, the kind that comes free with a hospital gift basket and usually ends up unused in a drawer. This one was not unused. The cover was soft from handling, the corners gone round. He left this in the recovery ward, she said. I almost mailed it to the address on his intake form. Then I thought, she stopped. I thought you should be the one to decide what happens to it. Aldric took it. He didn't open it, not then, not in front of her. He told me that part specifically, that he held it and didn't open it because some part of him already understood that whatever was inside it would not be a thing he could close again afterward. Dr. Ashford left without finishing her coffee. Aldric stood in the front hall for a while, the notebook in his hand, and then he went and sat on the bottom stair. Not the study, not anywhere with a desk, just the stairs, like a much younger man waiting for someone to come down and tell him what to do, and he opened it. The first page was dated 5 months back, before Pax was born, before any of it. Hi. I don't know if you'll ever read this, which is sort of the point, I think. It's easier to say things to someone who isn't listening yet. Today they said your heart looks good on the monitor, which is more than mine can say for itself, ha. Your dad doesn't know about that part, and I'd like to keep it that way for now, if that's all right with you. He has enough to carry. I want to tell you about him, actually. Your dad. Because by the time you're old enough to ask questions about him, he'll already be someone you know. But I want you to have this version too, the one from before you got here, the one nobody else is writing down. He doesn't say, I love you very often. I used to think that meant something it didn't. He says it in other ways. He remembers the small things. He notices when I'm cold before I do. Once in November, I mentioned, just once in passing, that I missed the bakery near my old apartment, the one that closed. 3 days later, there was a box from them on the counter. He'd found out they still did mail orders. He never mentioned it again. I never thanked him properly because I didn't want to make it a big thing, and now I wish I had, because I think he needed to hear it more than I needed to not make it a big thing. Anyway, that's your dad. He's the kind of person who will move an entire morning around to make sure you have a thing you mentioned once and forgot you said out loud. I hope you get some of that. I hope you also get some of the part where he lets people see it. Aldric stopped reading there. He told me that too, that he stopped and sat on the stairs for a long time with the notebook closed in his lap, and that the house was very quiet, and that somewhere down the hall Pax was making the small sounds he made when he was about to wake up hungry, and that Aldric sat there and listened to those sounds and did not move for what felt to him like a very long time. He didn't go to Donnelly's office that night either. But he didn't sleep, and in the morning, when Donnelly arrived with a folder 3 inches thick, the full audit, the bank trail, the server records, 11 months of it laid out in chronological order, Aldric was already at his desk and the notebook was sitting on the corner of it, closed where he could see it. He read the audit in absolute silence. Donnelly told me later that he'd expected anger, had braced for it, honestly, had a speech half prepared about chain of custody and next steps, and that what he got instead was worse. Aldric read every page. He didn't ask questions. When he got to the 3rd section, the one with the server provisioning dates, the one that proved the emails couldn't have existed when they claimed to, he went very still, the same stillness from the kitchen. The stillness Donnelly had learned in 11 years meant the opposite of calm. Whitlock's authorization code is on the request, Donnelly said quietly. For the document generation, it's logged. I checked it against the legal office's internal system 3 times. Whose authorization is above Whitlock's, Aldric said. It wasn't really a question. Donnelly didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had the careful flatness of a man delivering something he wished he didn't have to. There's a secondary sign-off requirement for anything touching donor-facing communications above a certain threshold. Founder's office retains it, has since the foundation was established. My father, Aldric said. I haven't confirmed that yet, Donnelly said. I wanted to bring you what I had before I went further. I thought, given everything, you'd want to be the one who decided how far further goes." Aldric looked at the notebook on the corner of his desk for a long moment. "Go further," he said. The snow started somewhere south of the New Hampshire line, and by the time the rented car crossed into Vermont, it wasn't snow anymore so much as a kind of erasure, the road narrowing under it, the hills losing their edges, everything going soft and white and quiet. I'm telling this part the way I came to know it, which is mostly secondhand, except for the very end, which I was there for. I want to be honest about the seams. Aldric, it took 11 days to find him, not because Cress had hidden well. He hadn't tried to hide at all, which was, Aldric thought later, its own kind of statement. A man who wanted to disappear would have used cash, would have avoided his own name, would not have signed a rental agreement for a room above a print shop using the name on his driver's license, Elias Hart, the same name on every document Aldric had ever seen, because Cress had never had a reason to be anyone else. It took 11 days because Aldric was not looking for a runaway. He was looking for a man who'd been wronged, and those are different searches. One assumes flight. The other assumes a person simply stopped somewhere the way a clock stops, and the 11 days were mostly Donnelly's team working backward through a life that had almost no digital footprint once you removed the foundation from it. A bus ticket purchased with cash at a Greyhound counter in a town 2 hours from the estate. A name on a guest registry at a youth hostel that turned out to be borrowed. Cress had given his bunk to someone who needed it more and slept in the common room instead. The hostel manager remembered, because he kept apologizing for taking up space, which nobody does, you know. Nobody apologizes for that. And then finally, a name in a small ledger in a print shop in Millhaven, Vermont, population 800 and something, the kind of town that has one stoplight and is proud that it's necessary, where an elderly woman named Ren Solly had written in the column marked room rented to, the name E. Hart, and beside it, in smaller writing, as if she'd added it later, the boy from the Cresthaven dinner. The one who got the Hargrove kids their scholarships. I remembered his face. Aldric had been at the foundation for the Hargrove scholarship dinner. He had not remembered Ren Solly's face. Cress had. The drive took 6 hours in good weather. It took 9 in the snow, and Aldric did it with Pax in the back seat in a car seat that had cost more than some cars, asleep through almost all of it, because, and this detail mattered later, though Aldric didn't know it yet, Pax had always slept better in motion, in cars, the way some babies do, and Aldric had not wanted to leave him. He told me much later that he hadn't decided to bring Pax. He just found himself at 6 in the morning strapping the car seat in, and some part of him had known, without articulating it, that whatever he found at the end of this drive, it needed to include all 3 of them, or it wouldn't mean anything. The print shop had a single window, fogged from the inside, with a hand-lettered sign that said Solly and Son, printing since 1962, though the and Son had been crossed out at some point and never replaced. A bell over the door, the smell of ink and old paper and a wood stove going somewhere in the back. Ren Solly looked up from a flatbed press when Aldric came in, snow on his shoulders, a baby carrier in one hand. She looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that takes in everything, the coat, the car outside, the baby, the way Aldric was standing like a man who'd driven a long way and hadn't slept, and then she set down whatever she'd been holding. "He's upstairs," she said, not a question. "Door at the top on the left, knock first, he startles." Aldric stood there for a moment. "He's not in trouble," Ren added, and there was something sharp in it now, something that made Aldric understand instantly that this woman had decided at some point in the last 11 days that she was going to stand in front of Cress if she needed to. "Whatever you're here about, he hasn't done anything wrong, and if you think he has, you're wrong, and you can leave the way you came in." "I know," Aldric said. "I know he hasn't." Something in his voice, he didn't know what, he told me. He genuinely didn't know what was in his voice, but something made Ren's expression shift. She studied him another moment, then nodded once toward the stairs, the same kind of nod Cress had given him in the kitchen 11 days earlier. A small, complete thing. A door opening or closing, depending on which side of it you were on. I heard the knock before I heard anything else, and I knew it wasn't Ren because Ren never knocked. She just called up the stairs, teas on, in the same tone every morning, and I'd come to depend on that tone the way you depend on a clock. This knock was different. 2 knocks, a pause, then one more. I don't know how to explain why I knew it was him from that, except that I did immediately before I'd even finished sitting up, and my chest did the thing it did. The missed stare thing, except worse this time, longer, and I had to put my hand flat against the wall and wait for it. I'd been printing cards. Small ones. Ren had an order for a wedding, 200 invitations, and she'd shown me how to run the press the second day I was there, after she'd caught me staring at the machine for 20 minutes instead of going back upstairs to lie down, and she'd said, not unkindly, "You're going to wear a hole in my floor pacing. Might as well make yourself useful." My hands had gotten steadier with the work, not my heart, but my hands. I opened the door. He looked terrible. I want to say that first because it's true, and because it mattered. Aldric, who I had never once in 2 years seen with his tie loosened in public, who ironed his own shirts because he didn't trust the dry cleaner's machine, was standing in the doorway of a room above a print shop in a coat with melted snow soaking through the shoulders, and he had not shaved, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 11 days ago, and he was holding Pax's carrier with both hands like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Pax was awake, looking up at the ceiling with the unfocused, faintly suspicious expression newborns have, like the world owed him an explanation it hadn't yet provided. Neither of us said anything for a moment. The wood stove popped downstairs. Snow ticked against the single window. "You didn't take your coat," Aldrich said. It wasn't what I expected him to say. I don't know what I'd expected. An apology, maybe, or worse, an explanation, the kind of careful legal explanation Aldrich gave when he decided something needed to be smoothed over. I hadn't expected him to sound like that. Like the coat was the thing that had been sitting in him for 11 days, the detail he couldn't get past, the one small fact that had refused to file itself away under anything else. "I know," I said, "you didn't take your phone." "I know that too." He looked at me for a long moment. I felt my scent shift. I always did around him. Even now, even after everything, the suppressants thinner than they used to be after months of skipping doses I couldn't afford and didn't think I deserved. And I saw him register it, the way he always had, that small flicker of something crossing his face that he never quite let finish. "The notebook," he said. "Rue gave it to me." I felt that land somewhere under my ribs, sharper than the eurythmia, a different kind of missed stare. "That wasn't for you," I said. "Not yet, not," I stopped. "It was for him later, when he's old enough to." "I know what it was for," Aldrich said. His voice did something then. Cracked isn't the right word. It was smaller than that, a hairline thing, the kind of crack you only see if you're looking for it, and I was. I'd spent 2 years learning to look for the small things in Aldrich's voice. "I read the part about the bakery." I didn't say anything. "You never told me you knew about that," he said. I thought I'd done that quietly enough that you'd never." "I noticed," I said. "I notice things." "Yes," Aldrich said, "you do." And then, because I think neither of us knew what came next, and because Pax made a small sound from the carrier. Not quite a cry, just a sound, the "I exist," and would like this acknowledged sound he made sometimes. Aldrich crouched down, right there in the doorway, and lifted him out and held him against his chest the way he had in the kitchen 11 days ago, except this time he wasn't looking past me at a window. He was looking at me over the top of our son's head, and his eyes were doing something I had genuinely never seen them do before, not once, not in 2 years. "I have to tell you what I found," Aldrich said, "all of it, and I don't." He stopped, started again. "I don't expect you to make this easy. I wouldn't if I were you. I just need you to let me say it." I stepped back from the doorway, not far, just enough. "Okay," I said. He came in, and Pax made another small sound, and outside the snow kept falling on Millhaven, and Ren Solly, downstairs, turned the radio up slightly. I found out later she did that on purpose, to give us privacy, the same way she'd been doing small, unannounced kindnesses since the day she'd recognized my face from a photograph 11 days and a lifetime ago. He told me everything. The forged emails, the server dates that proved the impossible, Whitlock's authorization code on a document he'd never have admitted to creating if the metadata hadn't done the admitting for him. He told me about the secondary sign-off, the one only the founder's office could give. He told me, and this part he said very carefully, like he was placing something on a table between us, and didn't want it to slide, that Donnelly's team had gone further, the way Aldrich had told him to, and that further had led to 2 years of quietly divested Foundation assets, routed through accounts that all eventually led back to one signature. "My father," Aldric said. I sat down on the edge of the bed. Pax had fallen back asleep against Aldric's shoulder, the particular total surrender sleep of very small babies, and Aldric stood there holding him, and for a moment I couldn't say anything at all because I was thinking about the folder. "There's something you need to see too," I said. "On the shared drive, Grant's Archive 2021, then working, then a file called MISC Donor Crosscheck. I started it 8 months ago. I stopped, started again the way he had. I found anomalies in the Caldwell allocations. I didn't know what they meant, not at first. I just knew the numbers didn't reconcile, and I kept finding more of them, and I didn't know who to tell because every time I thought about telling someone, I thought about how it would look. An omega in the Grant's office, flagging discrepancies that traced back toward the founder's office. I knew exactly how that would look, Aldric. I knew exactly what story that would become if anyone wanted it to." Aldric had gone very still. "That's why," he said slowly, "the forged emails were sent to me, not discovered by accounting. Not flagged through proper channels, handed to me directly at a dinner by Whitlock in an envelope. Because someone needed you to find a reason to remove me," I said, before I found the real one. The wood stove popped again downstairs. Pax slept on, oblivious the way babies are allowed to be. "He used me," Aldric said. His voice had gone somewhere I'd never heard it go, not angry, not yet. Something underneath anger, something that sounded almost like grief for a version of himself he hadn't known he'd been carrying. He knew exactly which buttons to press. He knew I'd believe it instantly because he stopped. "Because what?" I asked, even though some part of me already knew. "Because I'd been waiting for a reason," Aldric said, and it came out flat, the way true things sometimes do, with no room left in them for softening. Not wanting one, but some part of me had never stopped expecting that eventually you'd be taken from me one way or another because that's what happens in my family. People leave or they're made to leave, and I've never once in my life seen it happen any other way. So when the envelope came, some part of me wasn't even surprised. That's the part I can't, his jaw worked. That's the part I have to live with, not that he lied, that I was ready to believe it. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Outside, the snow had picked up. I could see it through the single window, coming down in that thick, unhurried way it does in places that get a lot of it, like it has nowhere else to be. "I left because I believed it too," I said quietly, "not the lie. The part underneath it, that you were already looking for a reason. I'd been thinking it for months. Every time something went wrong with my heart and I didn't tell you, every time I thought if he knew, he'd think I was a liability, he'd think I was one more thing he had to manage. And then the envelope came and some part of me thought, there it is, I was right." I looked up at him. We were both ready for the same ending, we just got there from different directions. Aldric crossed the small room 3 steps. The room wasn't big enough for more, and sat down on the bed beside me, Pax still asleep against his chest. And for a moment neither of us said anything else, because there wasn't anything else, not yet. Not that would fit in this room with the stove popping downstairs, and the snow coming down outside, and 2 years of careful, precise, deliberate misunderstanding sitting between us like something that had finally been set down after being carried too long. "There's a trustees meeting in 9 days, Aldric said finally. "The annual one, my father will be there, the full board." He turned his head slightly, looking at me, and something in his face had gone very tired and very clear at the same time. "I have to go back for that. I'm not asking you to come with me for it. I wouldn't ask that of you, but I need you to know that when it's done, whatever's left of the foundation after it, it's not going to be my father's anymore. And it's not going to be mine either." "What is it going to be?" I asked. Aldric looked down at Pax, asleep, one small fist curled against the fabric of his coat. "His," Aldric said, "in trust, protected, the kind of thing that can't be used the way it's been used." He looked back up at me. "And then I'm done with it, all of it. The directorship, the board seat, the name on the building, I'm done." "Aldric," I said his name carefully, the way I always did, like it cost something. "You've spent your whole life being that name." "I know," he said. "That's rather the point." I didn't say anything else. Pax stirred, made a small sound, settled. Outside, Ren Solly's radio kept playing something low and warm through the floorboards, and the snow kept coming down over Millhaven, soft and total and endless, the way it does in places far enough from anywhere that the world feels for a little while like it's holding still on purpose. The trustees' meeting was held in the great hall of the Foundation's headquarters, a room built to make people feel small. I knew it well. I had stood in it as a grant writer, as an associate, as the director's partner, always in the correct place, always slightly outside the center of the room where the power lived. I was not there for this either. I heard about it afterward from Donnelly, who is not a storyteller by nature, but who told this one with a precision I have come to value. He told me Aldric walked in at exactly 9 o'clock, wearing the same coat he had worn to Millhaven, still carrying the snow on his shoulders. He did not use the podium. He stood at the end of the long oak table where the trustees sat, and he set down a folder the same color as the one Whitlock had handed him 3 weeks earlier. He did not raise his voice. This was noted by several people afterward, that he spoke the way he always spoke, measured, precise, as if the words were not destroying everything they touched. He presented the forensic evidence in order, the server dates, the authorization codes, the donor accounts with their quiet siphoning. He named Whitlock, then his father. He showed the board the archived folder, Grants Archive 2021/working/MISC donor crosscheck, and he told them who had created it, and why, and what it had cost the person who made it. My father was there. I have thought a lot about that, what it must have felt like to sit in a room full of people he had built his life around and watch his son dismantle every brick of it, one by one, without anger. Donnelly said Gareth Vane did not speak. He simply sat at the table, and when Aldric finished, he stood up, very slowly, and walked out of the room. No one stopped him. No one called after him. The door closed, and that was the last time anyone in that room saw him. The board voted an hour later. Aldric told me the vote was unanimous, that even those who had been closest to my father understood, once the evidence was laid out, that there was nothing to defend. He told me this in the car, driving back to Millhaven, with Pax asleep in the back seat, and he did not sound triumphant. He sounded tired, the way a man sounds after he has done something he never wanted to do because no one else was going to do it. He resigned the directorship the same day. The transfer of the Foundation's assets into a protected academic trust under Pax's name was already drafted, signed, notarized by the time the board's vote was recorded. Donnelly would oversee the transition. A caretaker board would run operations until a new director could be appointed. Aldric Vane, whose name was on 3 floors of the building, walked out of it at 5 in the evening with nothing but the coat he had worn in and the car keys in his hand. He drove north. The snow had stopped by the time he reached Millhaven 3 days later. He did not call ahead. He did not warn me he was coming. I was in the print shop sorting cards when I heard the bell over the door, and then I saw him, and I saw that he was alone, and I thought, for one terrible moment, Pax, the way you think when a man who left with a baby arrives without one. With Wren, Aldric said immediately, reading my face, and I felt the thing in my chest, the mist stare loosened slightly. She offered. She said she had things to teach him about ink. I set down the stack of cards. My hands were steady. They had gotten steadier over the days with the work Wren had given me. My heart was not, but I had stopped expecting it to be. The meeting, I said. I told you what I was going to do, Aldric said. I did it. He stood in the doorway of the small print shop, snow melting off his boots into a puddle on the worn floorboards, and he looked at me the way he had looked at me in the doorway of the room upstairs, like I was something he had not expected to find again. It's done, all of it. The Foundation is Pax's. The name is on the trust, not on me anymore. I have nothing left to give that building. I waited. There was a question I could not ask, because I didn't have the right yet, because too much had happened, and I didn't know how to shape it into words. Aldric answered it anyway. I'm not asking you to come back to the estate, he said quietly. I wouldn't ask that of you. I don't know what I'm asking. I just knew I wanted to be here, wherever here is, and that I needed to tell you that I am not the same person who stood in that kitchen 3 weeks ago. I don't know if that's enough. I don't know if it can be enough, but it's true. I stood there with my hands on the counter and the smell of ink and paper and wood smoke around us, and I thought about the notebook he had read, and the folder I had left on the shared drive, and the word I had not said in the kitchen that night, the one that would have changed everything if I had been brave enough to say it. I'm sorry, I said. Aldric's face did something not confusion, but something close to it, the question unasked. For not telling you, I said. The folder, the accounts. I had months to tell you, and I didn't because I was scared of what it would mean if you didn't believe me, and I was wrong. Not about being scared, but about not giving you the chance to choose who you wanted to be. I made that choice for you. That wasn't fair. Aldric crossed the room 3 steps, the same 3 steps from the room upstairs, and stopped just before the counter, close enough that I could smell him, pine and snow and something underneath that I remembered, that my body recognized even though I had tried not to let it. I would have believed you, he said. If you had told me earlier, I would have believed you. Would you have? A pause. A long one, the wood stove popped. No, Aldric said, and the honesty of it sat between us, raw and unsoftened. I don't know. I think I would have tried, but I don't know if I would have gotten there, not then. Not before I had to lose you to understand what I was losing. I looked at him, at the tired lines around his eyes, the collar of his coat turned up, the way he was standing like a man who had driven a long way in the dark and was not certain he had reached the right place. I want you to understand something, I said slowly. I didn't walk out that door because I thought you would come after me. I walked out because I thought you wouldn't. Aldric's hands went still on the counter. The stillness I had seen in the kitchen, the one that had meant he was already grieving something, except this time something in it was different, softer, slower, like the grief had already happened and what was left was something else. I know, he said. That's the part I can't undo, that you believed that. You can't undo it, I said, but you can do something with it. Our eyes met across the counter. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Aldric reached into his coat slowly, the way you reach for something you are not sure you should be offering, and he pulled out the notebook, the one from the recovery ward, the one Rue Ashford had given him. I brought this back, he said. It's not mine, it's yours and his when he's old enough. I took it. The cover was still soft, the corners still round. I could feel the weight of the words inside it. Words I had written to a son I had not been certain I would survive to raise, in a room that had not been my home, with a heart that had been trying to quit on me in secret for months. I opened it, not to the first page, but to the last one, the one I had written the night before I left the hospital, when I had been alone and sure I would never see Aldric again. I don't know if he'll come for me. I don't know if I want him to, but I want him to find this somehow, and I want him to know there was never anyone else. That's the part that will be hardest to believe, I think, but it's true. It was always him. It was always only him, no matter how badly I knew it could end. I want you to understand that when you're old enough. Some things you don't choose. You just know them, and then you live the rest of your life inside that knowing. I closed the notebook. Aldric, I said. He looked up. I'm not going back to the estate, I said. I can't. That place. I stopped. That place is where you sent me away. I don't think I can sleep there. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Aldric nodded. Once. A small, complete thing. Then I'll stay here, he said. Wherever here is, with you, both of you, if you'll have me. I looked at him, standing in the dim light of Wren's print shop, wearing a coat that was still damp from the road, carrying nothing but the shape of a life he had walked away from and the question of whether I would let him into this one. I thought about the word I had not said in the kitchen, the one that would have changed everything. The one I had not been brave enough to say. I said it now. Yes, he did not move. He stood there and I stood there, and between us was a counter covered in ink-stained paper and a notebook full of words written to a son who would one day read them, and a silence that was not empty, that was full, finally, of something that was no longer waiting. I live in Millhaven now. Wren's print shop has a new sign, Solly and Hart, she insisted, because she said I had earned the space beside her name. I run the press when she needs rest. I set type by hand, letter by letter, the slow way, the way that makes you feel the weight of each word before it touches paper. Aldric comes back on weekends. He drives up from the city, where he is learning to be someone who is not a director, not a Vane in the way that name was built to mean. He is learning to be a father in the slow, careful way of a man who understands he has ground to make up. On Sundays, he takes Pax to the diner where Marta, Donna, though I still think of her as Marta, pours his coffee without asking and talks to him about the weather. My heart does the thing less often now, not gone, but quieter. I have started to think of it not as something broken, but as something that learned over a long winter to keep time on its own, and now does not know quite how to trust that there is someone else listening. There is, I am learning to believe it. The snow has started to melt. Tomorrow I will print the wedding invitations Wren ordered, 200 of them, each one carrying the name of someone beginning something. I will set the type carefully, because I have learned that words on paper are the only things that last, and I want the ones I leave behind to be true.